Hey everyone, glad to have you here today. Another Thursday. It is just me. If you're wondering why there's not like a divider down the middle, and I'm over here, and Taylor's joining me. Taylor's going to be out today. He may be able to join us a little bit later. I'm not sure. Um, he's just had a conflict today, so I get to man the ship and grab the steering wheel and take this boat where I want it to go. But we're going to be talking about something that I think is actually really important, really interesting, something that I think presents an opportunity, maybe. So let's get into it and talk about what we're going to be talking about today. As you come in, just say hi, give us a thumbs up or a like, and let us know that you're here when you do that. Thanks so much. Jerry, thanks for the vote of confidence. I appreciate it. Um, yeah, not my first time, not my first rodeo for sure. But it's been nice having Taylor just kind of manage everything, and I get to just chime in every once in a while when I have something to say. So definitely not used to this yet. But thank you. So let's get into what we're talking about, which is what is Serp position zero, and how do you get there? So SERPs, as you know, is one of those buzzwords that we use in the marketing world and digital marketing. It just stands for search engine results position. Okay. So the SERPs, that's what everybody obsesses over. I want to be number one. I want to be up at the top. Well, number one is used to be the top, but now there's this thing called position zero, which is an animal, not terribly new, but it's been around for a little while. But it actually resides even above the ads or the everything else on the page. It's literally the first thing in the search results when you Google something, and it's oftentimes a bit of information pertaining to the specific search that somebody used. So uh, it really is the best organic position to be on the page if you can get it, but it's also hard to get. So before it was called a featured snippet. Lately, it seems like everybody's kind of shifted to talking about it as position zero, as sort of the buzzword for it. But it's it's interesting because uh, the featured snippet is content that Google has decided really meets a certain criteria for the searcher based on what they use to search. So if they used a term that was looking for information or something, and Google finds a website that seems to have the information that satisfies that query, then they're going to present that information as a snippet in the position zero at the top of the page to answer that person's question. Now, this is not something. Here's one of those things, like how to get there isn't just like it's not the same search game as some of the other things, because Google really controls it and says whether or not somebody can be in that position. So this is directly from Google. Read this quote: "From Google's mouth to your ears, we display featured snippets when our systems determine this format will help people more easily discover what they're seeking, both from the description." Let's see, it goes on. It broke off here. I guess it was a little too long. Uh, Both from the description about the page and when they click on the link to read the page itself. They're especially helpful for those on mobile searching or searching by voice. Now that's interesting, right? We talked in last week or the week before, I forget, we talked about how Google voice search was becoming a bigger and bigger part of the mix. And the reason we know that is because of the statistics, and we shared a lot of those statistics with you. But this position zero actually really is useful for someone who is doing voice search. I don't know how many times I've been sitting in the living room with my 15-year-old son, and you know how 15-year-olds, right? They know everything, and it takes much longer for them to mature before they realize that they don't know everything that they thought they knew. I think it was Mark Twain that said, "When I was a young man, I was amazed at how ignorant my father was, but as I grew up, it was amazing how much he had learned in such a short period of time." So that's kind of the thing. I use Google search all the time to help settle an argument with my son, who is for sure he's right about whatever it is we're talking about. And I'll just, hey, Google, and ask Google what the answer is to the thing. And a lot of times, what Google returns, Google, just the little Google box over there, just reads out the answer. It just says whatever it finds related to the voice search that I just told it to go do. And a lot of times it's grabbing that position 0 result and just reading it back to me. Maybe it's from a wiki article, or maybe it's, if we're talking about, converting inches to millimeters or something like that, and or Fahrenheit and Celsius, whatever, questions like that have definitive answers and authoritative sources that are presenting that answer. Oftentimes that's a position 0 result that gets returned. So you get a chance to look at, you can see it on your phone, but also Google, just speaks it out there and tells you. So I'm not going to tell you whether or not Google and I agree and my son is wrong most of the time, or whether he's right, or how often he's right. That's I'm just not even going to go there. Let's just say that I'm not batting 100 here. I mean, I'm not batting 1,000 rather. My son is sometimes right. So anyway, so we use Google to solve our things, and that's where a lot of it comes from, is that position 0 result, which is pretty cool. So what is the big deal about position 0? Well, as a business, if you can get the position 0, if you can be the business that is that Google says this is an authoritative answer, it satisfies the query that somebody just searched for, we're going to stick you up there at the top. Well, it gives you credit. It gives you instant authority. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, people will click that link to read more and jump onto your website, and voila, you've got an opportunity, a really good opportunity to sell to someone. Now, this works sometimes. I gotta be honest. It's sometimes the challenge is this: Google doesn't always. Not every industry gets featured snippets. Like, there's some industries, and we'll get into this here in just a little bit as I go. There's some industries that are way more, have a lot more featured snippets than others. A lot of that just comes down to how many websites are out there, which websites have big authority, like Wikipedia. I mean, there's not a single local business in any market that's going to be able to compete against the authority of a global website like Wiki. So if it comes down to your website presenting an answer and Wikipedia presenting an answer, then Wikipedia is most likely going to get that position 0 in that case. When you are talking about home services, oftentimes a lot of the answers that people are searching for about a plumbing problem or chimney smoke issue or something, there's fewer resources out there that can present that kind of information. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that Google could choose your website and put your content in search or position 0, but in a lot of industries, it's more prevalent than in our industries and home service businesses. So here's what Google says. Google's automated systems determine whether a page would make a good featured snippet to highlight for a specific search request. Your feedback helps us improve our search algorithms and the quality. Now, this is very true. Everything is moving toward AI. And as we're seeing more and more AI doing the algorithmic decision-making in Google searches, it's actually getting really good and even better in terms of what they're choosing to return. So what that means for us is that we don't control it. Let's be honest, we've never controlled Google and Google's search positions. There's nobody out there other than Google that has the ability to control it. We've certainly seen people be able to manipulate it for a little while before Google catches on, and they'll change it and switch the algorithm around to where now what used to work doesn't work anymore. That happens all the time. But nobody really controls Google or their search results, including now this new search position 0. So the challenge is really, it's going to come down to, and you're about to see, this conversation is going to change a little bit. We're not going to be talking about what it is. We're going to talk about what to do to increase your chances for higher ranking, including search position 0. And honestly, that just comes down to content. I would say one of the best content writers for home services businesses happens to work for us. Her name is Jessica Shepard. She is the voice of the brand for our business and dozens and even hundreds of businesses that we've worked with over the years. She crafts incredibly detailed and good content for the websites that we do for our clients. Pages and pages and pages, and the amount of depth and research that she goes into is phenomenal. We're just always excited when she shares with us some of the things that she uses as guidelines for helping to create that content. And you're lucky because today she's given me an entire list. She wasn't able to be on the show with me directly, but she's given me an entire list, and I want to go through some of the tips that she's given out here that I think are incredible things that we can all do. If you're writing your own content for your website, listen to these tips. Get an idea of what it takes in order to create content that Google sets up and pays attention to. Because, I mean, position 0 is great, but guess what? If you don't get position 0, position 1's pretty good. And position 2 and 3 are not too bad either. So this content will help if you start thinking about structuring your content in this way. It really does help. And this is inside secret stuff. I mean, when Taylor said, I want to share this stuff, I was like, really? You want to share this? Because this is like how the sausage is made. I mean, this is the way that we go about it as an agency. It's like, no, full transparency. We want people to understand what kind of hard work goes into this, and what it takes as an agency, but as anyone who's writing good content, what they have to do in order to create it. So we're going to share some of these tips now with you. And I don't have these typed up because it was they came to me late, and so I haven't had a chance to put them up on the screen, but I'm just going to read these to you, and we'll talk about them a little bit. So in any comments or questions, feel free to just chime in there in the comments section. If this is good content and you're enjoying it, make sure you give us a thumbs up or a like so that other people will see that as well. It helps us with our search engine results. Thank you for that. Okay, so how do you increase? Nearly 100% of the time, the pages that get featured snippets are already ranking really well for those searches. So already doing fairly well. Don't be discouraged. What we're talking about in terms of these tips are going to help you start to rank well. And once you've started to rank well and built that authority, then that position 0 finally opens up as a possibility for you. So first things first, you need to be working on the on-page SEO. That means the details that are on the page of the website or on the page that you want to rank well, and search optimize it according to a whole bunch of stuff that's really kind of beyond the discussion in this particular case. But trying to rank for those terms that you want to show up for, make it your goal to have the most thorough and relevant content of any other site out there, especially in your market, for the topic that you're wanting to rank for. Okay, what else can you do? Well, here's the tips. Number 1, answer all of the questions that you can think of around the topic right there on your website. So as a business owner, your phone rings all day long. Every one of those phone calls is going to have a question in it somewhere. And if you've been in a business any length of time at all, you already know, if I were to ask you what are the most common questions that you get asked, you already have kind of in the back of your mind an idea of what those questions are. If you can take those questions and answer them in a thorough way and create pages on your site with that content on there, that becomes the kind of content that can show up in position 0. It can help you rank incredibly high in search results. And it's just taking the time to answer the questions that you get every day, that you answer all day long on the phone. So using your website, number one, is going to cut down on a lot of those questions that you have to spend time answering on the phone, because a lot of people will have read that on the website. Because how did they find you? Well, that was what they searched for, and that was the page they landed on, and they read all about it. So now when they're calling you, they just want to get down to what time can you be here, and less about, hey, I've got this question, let me ask you this kind of thing. So pay attention to what your clients are asking on the phones and on the job, not just the phones, but also when you're with them and on the job. Create an entire list, just a running list, a constant place where you go deposit those questions on a regular basis. And then as you have time, or as people on your staff, or if you hire someone like Jessica and our team to write this kind of content for you, that becomes an incredibly valuable asset, that list of questions. So you can also cheat a little by typing one question or topic into Google and then following that rabbit trail down through the people also ask thing down at the very bottom. That's useful. I do that all the time with my work. When I'm looking for something that's very technical, related to coding or something, or website design, I'll do a search, and maybe I didn't ask the search exactly the way that Google was expecting me to ask it, but it thinks that I might be asking it a different, or that these other questions that people ask might be more relevant. I'll read those all the time. That gives me great information, and I click them all the time too, because oftentimes it gives me what I'm looking for. Somebody else just thought about a better way to ask it. So pay attention to that kind of stuff. Use Google as a tool to beat Google, to provide Google more of what it's really looking for. So Google can tell you how people are searching for the content on your website. Number two, this tip is great. Use clear headers and cross headers that let the reader and Google know what the content below is about. That way, when a searcher asks a query, Google sees that match on your website. So the headers, that's like, that's the title and the headlines. When you're writing an article or something using a word processor, right? When you identify that something is the title, or it's the header 1 or the header 2, heading 2, those are like hierarchical, right? The most important thing that tells you what this is about is the title. And then the next important thing that tells you what the paragraphs you're about to read are about is that heading 1. And then maybe down in heading 1, you see smaller ones that are heading 2 that tells you what this subsection is about. Google uses that hierarchy to really understand what the content is about. And if you can use those headers and those cross headers to signify what the question is that you're answering, then Google knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that when somebody types in something very close to what one of those headers says into the search results, it knows that it's got a page that talks specifically about that, because one of the main sections on that page says almost exactly that same search query, right? Does that make sense? So use those as a way to organize your content, and you'll see a lot of good results there. I think that's a brilliant tip. We are constantly optimizing content. We spend a lot of time and have a lot of people on our staff that go back and read through content to further optimize and improve headlines and headers and cross headers to make sure that they're accurately describing the content for that page. And it takes a lot of effort, but it's really worth thinking about from the top before you even set pen to paper or sit down at the keyboard with a blank word processing document, to ask the question, what questions am I trying to answer, and how do I structure this content in a way that communicates to the reader and to Google exactly what it is that I'm talking about. All right, number 3, structure. This is a great tip too, okay? Third tip, structure your website content in a logical order that flows. So consider what order your clients ask questions in and try to mimic that on the page. Oftentimes they don't start with the question that we would think would be the most obvious question. Oftentimes it's because they don't have enough knowledge to ask the right question first. That happens all the time. And so we need to educate, but don't think about it from your perspective as having years and years of experience and training under your belt and certifications and everything else to answer those questions. Think about it the way that your customer usually asks the question first. And then write it in a way that mimics the way that the learning process, that the journey that they have to go on in order to understand why the question that they ask may not be the best question to ask, or not the best way to ask it, or in order to answer that question, we need to know these things first, and that kind of stuff. If you can mimic that in the way, in your writing style, then you're doing a great job of making sure that the question that feels most relevant to your customer is the question that appears in the content on your page. Start with broader questions and get more detailed as you go down the page. This just makes sense from a visitor standpoint. A limited amount of time, somebody who comes and starts reading content that they saw a search result, you were presented as an answer, they liked what they saw, so they click on the result to read the rest of what you've got to say. If you're bogging them down with a lot of details in the beginning, they may never get down to the part that really is what they're after. So thinking about, like, you know, carving up the elephant into big chunks first, the primal parts first, and then each one of those primal parts, you're dividing it up into smaller and smaller bits and steaks that, you know, that are finally down to bite-sized bits. So that's the best way to, like, accomplish, you know, starting with the broad idea first, establishing what this is about, and then down further in the article, you get more details. People that stick around, that are detail driven, that love to get into the details and love to know everything there is to know about a subject, they'll stick with you way down the page. But a lot of people just get in, they get what they think they need, and then they jump out and they go elsewhere, or they just give you a call. So don't waste their time. Don't write for people that aren't going to read. You know, give them the good stuff up front, and then later on you can get into the details. I'm seeing this comment from a little bit earlier. Sorry, Tom, I'm bouncing around doing a lot of different things. I use them when skimming a site for what I'm looking for. I lost the thread on that one, bud. I'm sorry. I'm sure it was a relevant comment when you said it. It's tough doing this on your own. I gotta say, Miss Taylor, I wish you could say, oh, hey, look, this might be him right now. There he is.
Hey. Yeah.
How you doing?
How y'all doing?
Good to have you. Everything okay on your end? Are you hearing okay?
Oh yeah, everything's fine. I got a all thumbs up. I can get my gallbladder out. Whee!
Okay. Well,
okay. Maybe that was too much information.
So we're talking about. I'm going through the tips right now that Jessica shared with us, and hitting those. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen along as you've been driving or anything, but we've been talking about position zero, but ultimately this is a conversation about writing really good content for your website. Because even if you don't get position zero, writing good content for your site is going to give you the ability to rank higher and higher in those search results. And the longer Google sees that you're an authority website that holds on to those top positions on a regular basis for certain keywords and terms, then the more accessible that position zero becomes to you over time. So I'm just going through Jessica's master notes here on how she breaks down content and thinks about it for Google search.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I run into quite a bit when you talk to new people, and they say, well, I just want pictures. You know, the only thing I want you to do is put the really pretty pictures up there, and people can figure it out with pictures. And it's like, yeah, people figure it out with pictures, but we have to remember Google, even though they read the descriptions of the pictures that we put behind the scenes, you know, but what they don't do is they don't look at the picture and go, oh, that's a such and such or so and so. I mean, we have to tell them those things. So having a really good content on your website, that's not to say you don't need the pictures. I think the pictures are shortcuts for humans. But we do need to look at what what the algorithms do and how they work in conjunction with those pictures, and make sure we have really good information. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. Great point. All right, Tom clarified. Thank you, Tom, for clarifying for me. is about headings, skimming them when looking for answers, just like Google and search engines use them to learn about the page's content. Yeah, we're skimmers, right? We always have been. I mean, we digest content by headlines first. And if the headline grabs us or promises that this article has information that I want to read, then I get into the details. So, it would be like driving past a billboard at 80 miles an hour on the interstate, and that billboard was nothing but small print type, explaining some deep, some deep thing. I mean, I see this sometimes. A church or something will do this and print, 18 verses of scripture on this single billboard. Like anybody driving 80 miles an hour down the highway is going to be able to read any of that. So, when we blast people with too much small print, they lose interest. They don't know whether or not you're going to ever get to the thing that is important to them. But if they read headlines and your copy has a lot of headlines in it, then they immediately know exactly where to jump in the content to get it, which leads me to this next point, tip number 4 from Jessica, which is using short paragraphs that directly and concisely answer questions, and even using lists whenever it makes sense. Google seems to love to show lists in position 0. Boy, that is so true. I did a search the other day. It was a complicated search, and Google presented it to me with my answers in a list form. And I was so grateful for that, because that's exactly what I wanted to see. And the good thing about a list is it usually only shows you like 4 or 5 of the list bullet points, and then it says read more. And if you click read more, then it takes you to the full website where you can get into the entire article and read all of the things. So that gets you onto the website. So it's a great way to get the click, because one of the challenges with position 0 is if you can answer a question concisely for a searcher, then they may not come to your website. They may simply use the information that you presented in that snippet and go about their own way and never click to go to your website. And that is one of the, I wouldn't say dangers, but that is one of the challenges with using Google position 0. It may not lead to a click, but if you use a list, if you have content that you can put into a long list that answers the question, then a lot of times people have to click on it in order to go to your website to read the rest. So that's a great strategy.
So have you guys talked about how position 0 used to be like one query, but especially on your phone, if you've ever been sitting around at night, like there's this, I actually got a commercial the other day on Facebook about a different kind of joint therapy for dogs. Never heard of it before. So when I went out on my phone, because I was sitting in the living room, and I just typed in what that thing was, well, yeah, that came up in position 0, but underneath it was a whole lot of other questions. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
So it's kind of position 0.1, position 0.2, position 0.3, because you can go through that whole list of questions and open every one of those up. And if there was a list or something that leads you to a link over to somebody, to a website, that was great. But all that was happening before I ever got to anything that was local or an organic search. It was interesting because on the phone it does that. You kind of look at it on the desktop, but I kind of tend to overlook that on the desktop. But you can't hardly not look at it on a phone.
That's so true. I hadn't thought about that, but you're absolutely right. And those are the kinds of searches I tend to do on the phone anyway. So the ones that have the snippets. So that's great, a great point. So Jessica offers this as a last tip, and we'll wrap up here. She says, you need to accept that the top niches that get featured snippets are these categories: DIY, health, and finance. Okay, those are the 3 big categories that get snippets all the time. So think about when you do a search and when you've noticed a snippet, you're probably looking for something that starts with how do I do blah, 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 or what is the currency of this or whatever. What are the symptoms of this particular disease? When you're doing a search like that, then that's when you're going to see a lot of times that. Hey Taylor, I was going to ask you, and I was unclear. The snippet, the featured snippet, how does that relate, or is it different, or does this replace the old knowledge graph information that used to be presented? I haven't seen as much lately.
So the knowledge graph was part of Google My Business. That is really in a section of Google My Business that when you go in there, you get the knowledge graph, and it is associated with now Google Business Profile. And some of that stuff is changing. We're going to be talking about that probably in the next 2 or 3.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's one of those things. Um, Another thing I'll just tell you is the snippet really is associated with search. So it's in the search engine part of Google. So while they're kind of the same, they're also different.
Okay.
The other thing I will tell you, I know that those particular industries are really big in financial health and those things because most of us we go in and we ask a specific question. Another place is cooking. People doing any time you have a conversion, time, how many tablespoons is in a cup, how many teaspoons are in a cup. I mean, you start asking those kind of questions. Convert, Pacific time to Eastern. All those kinds of things are things that make a difference. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But don't discount that they're not coming up in your industry because we have lots of them that come up in chimney industry. I've seen them in plumbing. They do come up in those industries. It just may not be as searched as much, but yes, they do come up because we've seen them.
Yeah. 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 So the real point here is that even if you do all this work and you don't get the position 0, which is entirely likely, it's not work that's been done in vain. Writing good content for your website, for your pages, creating blog posts, these are things that really do help overall increase the availability of content that Google thinks is relevant to searchers. It increases your ability to get in front of searchers when it matters. So do that. Uh, Terry says, in creating content and blog posts, I have about 50 index cards with one subject per card that I want to write blog posts on. So much great content, but I just don't have time to sit down and write the blog posts. That is the problem for sure. And we understand how much time it takes. Jessica Shepard, more than everybody, understands the amount of time it takes to create good content. So it is a challenge, but it's very worth doing. So keep that in mind. And don't give up. Keep writing good content, and you're going to see some results. All right, so let's see. I think that's going to wrap it up for this week. You guys can find our show anywhere that fine podcasts are consumed. That would include places like Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, maybe Stitcher, I'm not sure. So, hey, bud, we lost you there. I'm just wrapping up the show. So letting people know where they can find us. If you guys have any questions, if you'd like to talk to a marketing company about how they can help you with some of the things that you're trying to do to increase the exposure of your business, we'd be happy to do that. You can just email Taylor at sparkmarketer.com is the best way to get a hold of him. And he'd be happy to have those conversations with you. All right. So next week, we're going to talk about why isn't SEO working for my business? This is a question we get asked a lot. We're going to have some good answers for you. We're going to talk about that. When you feel like all of these stuff that you've been paying people to do for you on your website isn't working, sometimes there's some good reasons for that. And sometimes there's a shift of thinking that is required. So we're going to talk about all of that and a lot more on the next episode. So that's going to do it for this week. Taylor, anything you want to add?
Hey, I just want to thank you for filling in for me because I appreciate that so much.
My pleasure. Glad everything's okay. And we'll talk, I'm sure, after this here in just a minute.
You bet.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Make sure, again, to give us a like and a thumbs up and share this with in your feed with anyone else that you think would benefit from this. We really are all about sharing good information, even with people who aren't our clients, because we want these industries that we care about to succeed. and to raise the standard for the entire industry. So thanks again for joining. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye, guys.